newest marvel of styling and engineering is now at your Cadillac dealers. The 1958 Cadillac is brilliantly new in beauty, with fabrics and appointments that introduce a new concept of interior elegance. And Cadillac's dynamic 1958 engine and revolutionary air suspension provide a totally new experience in modern motoring. See and drive Motorman's masterpiece, the 1958 Cadillac.
Thank you very much for turning up on this wet and vile day. I wanted to spend a little time this morning thinking about the 1958 Cadillac. You could be thinking about anything, and I'm serious about that. In thinking about this, I will be telling you some things about this car. But in a way, that's not what the purpose of the lecture is. The purpose of the lecture is to encourage you to think about how you can think about things. So we're using this car as a sort of kicking off point, but I want you to notice the manner in which I'm doing it, and I'll flag it up from time to time. So here we have it, the 1958 Cadillac. I asked you if you would be kind enough to have a look at a text that I sent out. And I said in the email, don't worry if you don't understand it, because you're going to be having a look at this text in the seminar later this morning. But it's a very striking piece of text. This is by Roland Barthes. And I want you to know, oh no I don't, because that'll come out in the seminar. I'll just read it to you. I think that cars today are almost, and this is today, 1957, written actually a couple of years before. Cars today are almost the exact equivalent of the great Gothic cathedrals. Okay, so something from the Middle Ages. I mean the supreme creation of an era, conceived with passion by unknown artists, and consumed in image, if not in usage, by a whole population which appropriates them as purely magical objects. Now, I'm not going to unpack that for you, but I did want you to just let it linger with you and have a think about it as we consider these things. Here is Roland Barthes, and he is eminently mid-20th century, smoking like a chimney whilst teaching. I don't think that would happen these days. And he was writing about this car, a French car, a European car, the Citroën DS, which if you say it's DS, and if you say DS in French, it sounds like goddess. So the magical thing possibly is there. But I think we ought to draw a very sharp contrast between the DS, which is modern and advanced and sculptural, but it is not dripping with glittering chrome. And above all, it is not vulgar. And so what we're looking at here, if design is a kind of language, it's part of the way in which we talk to one another. These are different languages with different accents. And part of what we're going to look at this morning is how the different language, the language of that, emerges. So, the 1958 Fleetwood 60 Special, in case there's any car nerds out there, it's a particular one of it. I'm going to test a couple of ideas. If we were going to be grand about it, we'd call them theses. This is my thesis. It's just a couple of ideas that we're going to look at. They're not radical. They're fairly standard, but we're going to apply them in considering this object. So the first idea is that the design of the 1958 Cadillac, the shape, the colours, materials and finishes, okay, that's the physical object. And then the meanings attributed to them, to it then, were functions of the wider social, political, economic, and technological context out of which it emerged. Now, I put them in different colours because we're inclined to recite those as a sort of litany and say, yeah, 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 yeah. But actually, in what's following, I hope that you'll see all of those things in action, and all of those things directly informing how that gets to be like that. So that's the first idea. Here's the second idea. It does this because in America, both the designers, there's a design, and the buyers, here are buyers, I think he's buying it. I'm not being sexist, I'm being fractionally realistic about the nature of the marketplace. Ideas were deeply informed by what? Surprise. That what? Again, okay? So the people who are designing are living in that world, the people who are buying are living in that world, and those are the things that are affecting how they're thinking and feeling. And on both sides, they're informing the nature of the design language, the transaction that's going on between them. Transaction. People, this car, it gets sold, so the language has to work. The rhetoric has to be effective for people to say, yeah, I'll have one of those. Sorry, Bill. Okay, so okay, this is my baldest, plainest slide. It may possibly be the most important one, because these are the things that we use to try and understand what we're doing with this car. We could do it with anything. We could do it with something from the present day. And I am thrilled that you are doing the Imagining Things project. I really am. It's one of the things that we've come up with over the years that I think is a really interesting thing to do. And it's called Imagining Things, the Present in the Past. And it occurred to me that maybe one could do a version of this where you use the 1958 Cadillac, except the problem with it is that it's not much. I mean, there are little details, things like the heraldry at the front, but there's not a lot of sort of having present in the past, so it's not going back. But what I guess it is, or I hope that I'll show you that it is it's the future in the present. Okay, and in the lecture I said, in the past. That was just a cheap trick. I mean, it's just the past in the sense that it's 1958. But this design embodies an attitude towards the future that is physically in this car. So, that's how. We'll start with some of these ideas. America is not Europe. America is different. America violently severed its links with an imperialist nation, Britain, in the 18th century, and that's its roots. So it is not European, and is very proud of not being European. America is, as its founding fathers would have it, a democratic country. We'll not linger over the shortcomings of the nature of 18th century democracy, but still, that's the abstract idea that is liked. And notionally, you'd think, well, that's good, because then everybody's equal. But everybody's equal, but not the same. So even though they may have escaped a class system, they nonetheless replicate one. This car is an Hispano Suiza. This car, when it came out in 1929, I think, was so expensive and so refined, it made a Rolls-Royce look vulgar. But it is absolutely belonging to a language of aristocracy, of privilege, and of European wealth. There it is. Here you go. Literally. Because essentially cars start out as replacements for carriages. They were known as horseless carriages. The people who rode in carriages had money. It cost money to ride in a carriage. It cost money early on to ride in a car. They were expensive playthings for rich people, and they weren't terribly reliable, and they wouldn't get you very far. But there they were, horseless carriages, attracting a lot of attention. And the first one in America, 1893, still looks like a carriage. It looks like horseless carriage. And just a little footnote here. This engineering thing had already made one very democratic revolution possible, particularly in Europe. The bicycle. It meant that individuals had a freedom, and actually advertisers of the Oldsmobile ad would have you believe, and I want you to see the price. It says $2,750 in 1908. So what does that mean? So you go on a website that tells you, and it's not obvious, but either way, it's a shed load of money. The absolute minimum is $73,000 today, 2014, say. Or, using another type of calculation, it's potentially $1.5 million. Now, it's probably somewhere in between, but it is a lot of money. A lot of money. Now, here's a car that doesn't look unlike that car, quite similar. It's just very different. It's the Model T Ford. So, stylistically, not particularly innovative, but innovative because of the manner in which it is made and marketed. Here we see the young Henry Ford. Here we see an early Henry Ford of about 1908. And here we see the price of the car. The price of the car, $650, which is a lot less. Really, a lot less. I mean, look, there's the other prices. A lot less. And this is to a nation of people who see themselves as individuals and who aspire to a car. And here comes a car that they can have. And the reason they can have it is because of the assembly line. Brilliant invention. Far more interesting than the car. You have this thing that moves along, you put bits on it. We're so familiar with it now, we take it for granted. Before 1913 in Highland Park in Detroit, it did not exist. It did not exist. And it enabled the car to be made more cheaply, more cheaply, more cheaply, more cheaply, to a dramatic degree, and it was very good PR. Lots of people bought them. Notice in the advertising it says, within the means of millions, as if this is really a point of pride. Millions of people could buy this car, and sure enough they do, in huge quantity. Mass production meant a Model T, which cost $850 in 1908, could be bought for $290. So, I mean, that is an incredible reduction in price in 1924. But by 1924, they're piling out of the production line, and nobody is buying them. So what went wrong? It's to do with the car and a sense of identity. The Ford, well, let's go back, just do this very quickly. The reason the Ford succeeded in the beginning was it had a marketplace that people said, yeah, I want a car. I could get a car. I've got a car. He's got a car. He's got a car. She's got a car. Everybody's got a car. So they modify their cars to make it different, but you can only have that market once. In order to discover the alternative way of marketing cars, we have to go to Hollywood. How many for time? Oh, God. We'll have a little bit of this. Here we are. Harley Earl is a man who takes very expensive chassis of cars and he cuts them in half and he adds stretches of metalwork in them so that they become incredibly long. We know how big American cars are today. They used to be even bigger. So he would take that and then he would custom make coachwork to go with them that would look pretty fab. So here's one, for example. And it's still making the references to European carriages. It's big, it's impressive, and it's still got that sort of European whiff to it. This is another important player in the story, Alfred P. Sloan Jr. Alfred P. Sloan Jr. is not a designer, he's a businessman. And what eventually he does is he devises, by buying up different companies, General Motors. So General Motors, you don't buy a General Motors car, but General Motors is a range of brands. So here we have the Chevrolet, okay, $695, so a bit more expensive, but notice the ad is saying quality determines whether the price you pay is economical or uneconomical, because they know they're competing with a much cheaper car like Ford. And then we get the Oakland, that sort of vanished. 1,375, so getting a bit more expensive. The Buick was more expensive still, and then right at the top, we have the Cadillac, a car which promises glamour, the life of the rich. But notice again, that's probably a European scene. I mean, conceivably it's California, but it definitely has the look of a luxurious life. So what you have there in motors is a version of a class system. Different brands aimed at different people, and they are distinguishable from one another, unlike the Model T Ford. So, here we have Alfred P. Sloan appointed Harley Earl, to come and preside over an outfit called Art and Color, which eventually became Styling. He doesn't design anything. He has a whole load of designers in a studio, and he says, I like that, I don't like that, I like that, I don't like that. And he's in charge of it. He's incredibly powerful. So, okay, Model T Ford was a failure. We can zip past that. I just want you to look at this radiator very carefully. It's a radiator. It is a radiator. It has air that goes through it that cools the water, that cools the engine. It is a radiator. Here is another car. It looks similar. Look at the radiator. That is not a radiator. That is a shell outside the car where the radiator might be. So the radiator is just behind it. And then you look at this one, and that shell has started to take on a life of its own. It isn't the radiator anymore. What's happened is that using the bodywork of cars, they are adopting expressive values that are detached from function. They're meant to make you like it more and meant to make you desire it so that you'll part with money. So the young men who were designing these cars, and they were all young men, in the 40s and 50s, had grown up in the 20s and 30s. And what they'd grown up against was a background where science and futurism, science fiction, all of that, incredibly popular, very much fired the imagination of these small boys as they were growing up. And sure enough, it finds its way into what they start to do with cars. This radiator is becoming really not a radiator at all. And clever Harley Earl invents this thing called the concept car. And the purpose of the concept car is you put it out into the world and you gauge public reaction to it before you commit millions to setting up the production line to make the thing. So if people go, wow, that's good. If they go, ugh, that's bad. It's a very useful marketing tool. This is the Buick LaSalle, a concept car made in the late 1930s when no cars on the road looked like this. We're familiar with them now because it did eventually, in the styling details, go into it. Now, this is where we get to the sex and violence. There had to be some. It's not because I just sort of always seem to go there. It's because they're in the car. Okay? I said that we need to think about the context out of which this 1958 car emerges. That's 1958, which is 13 years after the end of the Second World War in 1945, which started in 1939. America had what we can only perhaps describe as a good war. I mean, no war is good, but it was a good war in the sense that very little of it was fought on their territory. They ended the war with Europe pretty much decimated by what had gone on. So America is indisputably, for the first time in human history, the most powerful country in the world, the richest country in the world. So America is sort of ready to thrive in the post-war climate. And remember, their factories have not been damaged. They've been sent over to war use, but they've not been damaged, so they're ready to go, and they go. This is where the violence comes in. Because Harley Earl was extremely well connected, not least with the American military, he knew somebody who was prepared to show him their new secret weapon. And it was so secret that he wasn't even allowed to walk up to it close. He had to look at it in a hangar with him at one end of the hangar and with one of those at the other end of the hangar. It's a Lockheed P-38. And this, we're talking in the 1940s, okay, when the war is still waging. And he can immediately see that whatever else this thing does, it's a beautiful object. It is a beautiful object. And he puts, if you like, the image of that car in his mind, ready to think about how it might be used in post-war styling of General Motors cars. And now, we get to the sex. This is Dagmar. She has a real name. Her real name was Virginia Ruth Egmore. Dagmar came from a very humble background and was one of the first television personalities in American television. And post-war American television is absolutely taking off. Very commercial, very unlike our own chaste BBC programs. In order to thrive, they had to get people to watch it, and they would use personalities like Dagmar. And Dagmar, I'm just reflecting what was happening at the time. Dagmar was there partly because of the way that she looked. All right? Just look carefully. Looked. The way that she looked. So, there we have Dagmar. And we get to this car. This is starting now. No car like this on the road. Buick LeSabre, 1951. No car like this on the road. This doesn't even have headlamps. This is a concept car. Here we can see it built out of plasticine. They're playing with it. They're saying, well, how can we make it even better? And then they might spray it so it looks like metal. And they make this car, and they take it places, and they show people. And notice the car now. Look at the body. A complete work of fiction. The fiction is this car is so powerful, it will suck air in the front and it will jet it out the back. Rubbish. It's got a motor in like any other car. But the fiction has completely taken over, and they are not afraid of vulgarity at all. And you will notice that it has the two fins, just like the Lockheed P-38. And it also has pointy bits at the front. Look at these here. The people who were designing these cars were these young men. And it looks a bit military, okay? So, America, big military power, they look like they've got some sort of, they're going to fire or something. But in the design studio, they were called Dagmars. Are we having Dagmars on the car? Yes, there they are. So, the Cadillac becomes the Cadillac with no fins. But Harley Earl knows what he's doing, and what he does is, he doesn't give people fins straight away to sell more cars because they have the annual model change. Model T, they said, we never change it, it's perfect. We never change it, they changed it, but nobody noticed. Annual model change, so each year, they start to make the fins a bit bigger, Whoop, there we go. So, and everybody's, oh wow, bigger fins. So, I mean, eventually this strategy of his breaks down because other manufacturers start doing fins too. But what we have is a marketing program that is based on the shape of the car. And of course the fiction of the car is this car goes so fast. It's like an aeroplane and it needs these things to stabilize them. Rubbish. Absolute rubbish. It's just fiction again. But that is the narrative, and of course, it's very effective. So, how come this car gets to be like this? Possibly the self-confidence of the nation. Possibly a level of arrogance. This is not a polite car. Possibly rich, really rich country, where the wealth needs to be expressed. Possibly a sense of power, and we can think about what kind of power somebody buying this car might think they were acquiring when they got it. And possibly a function of a male-dominated society. Now I'm just throwing those out. I don't have time to develop any of them. Any of them could be developed somewhat. So, the 1958 Cadillac, with huge fins and generous military-style dynamos, the car has fantasy expression, masculine power, and sexual potency. I argue. I believe that that's what was going on. We had looked at some of those ads earlier. Of course, they would never directly refer to such things. And who knows even if the designers thought in those terms. We don't know. We don't have their recorded conversations. So the outside of the car, this is 1955, but the outside of the car is one story, and inside there's sort of these things that nobody really cares about that actually do the work. So I claim, first idea, I suggest the design of this Cadillac, the shape, colours, materials and finishes, and the meanings attributed to it, then were functions of the wider social, political, economic, and technological context out of which it emerged. Now, I've scooted through that so quickly, shamefully quickly, but I hope I flagged to you some suggestions that that might actually be true. When you look at the design of something, every single element of that design represents a human decision to make it this way and not that way, or that way. And part of understanding how design works is to get back to that decision-making process. The other half of it is how those decisions are then received. I would argue that the second idea also holds, that because the people designing these cars understood they were designing for people like themselves. And what it meant was that this kind of design was a language where what was being said and what was being heard was understood